Hello, welcome to Beat You To It. I'm your host, Conley. Beat You To It is a podcast dedicated to interviewing up-and-coming musicians. In this episode, I'll introduce you to Nick Owen, a 21-year-old DIY musician from Concord, Massachusetts. But first, some background. What is DIY music? In simplest terms, DIY music is homemade by the artist. As Nick does, musicians play their own instruments, or sing, or both, record and produce their music, usually without the help of a label or music industry professional. DIY artists release their music on Bandcamp, SoundCloud, or a bigger entity like Apple Music. Artists book and play their music at house shows or small venues, which are usually packed with like-minded individuals in the DIY music scene. Like-minded usually meaning they are passionate about homemade music and passionate about political or social causes. A well-known artist that got their start in the Concord and Boston DIY music scene is Clairo, now signed to Fader label, and has had a successful debut album, Immunity. I think another aspect to understanding DIY music and Nick Owen is where he lives, Concord, Massachusetts, which is known for things like the shot heard around the world and Little Woman. This town is filled with an extreme amount of history, and in this episode I'll introduce you to Concord in the 21st century, one that many people may not know about. A Concord that fosters and supports musicians of all sorts. So, who is Nick Owen? Well, he's my younger brother for starters, but more specifically, he is passionate about creating music and supporting and listening to other DIY musicians. Our basement has turned into a makeshift recording studio. He also plays bass in the band Edge Petal Burn, who were nominated for New Artist of the Year in 2018 at the Boston Music Awards for their 2018 debut album, Glass Cannon. After we listen to the song Straight Edge by Nick Owen, we will get the opportunity to learn more about the DIY music scene, Nick's musical origins, and much more. This is Straight Edge by Nick Owen. Welcome, Nick. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so when did you realize you liked making music?
Well, I started my earliest memories of really ever making music, I think when I was in maybe the later part of elementary school, trying to use an earlier version of GarageBand on an older Mac laptop that we had. Trying to make music that way. I had really no idea what I was doing, but I was trying to make songs that way. And that's also around the time that I got my first drum set. So it all sort of, I guess, started in maybe between 4th and 5th grade.
But more recently, you've been making some music. Do you want to speak on that?
Well, since the pandemic has really taken everything over in the world, I have moved back in with my parents here in Concord. So, we've been in the same house for a while now, and been spending a lot of time making music since I am really trying to take advantage of what I have here.
So we have this basement, and you do a lot of recording and other various projects down there. So do you want to explain exactly what you do down there?
Yes, the basement. So right now, the basement is primarily where I play the drums. That's where the drum kit is. That's where I've been recording short snippets of beats that I can put into the computer and loop over and over again and layer. that's what I'm doing currently. I mean, in general, it's the place where the drum kit lives and where I always record drums. But I'll also play bass down there, and I'll record bass guitar. Over the years, it's been a place where, like as I'm doing right now, recording solo music, but also where many of my bands have practiced and written many songs. There's also been several shows down there, primarily when I was in high school here in Concord. And many other things have happened down there, even, say, screen printing shirts the night before one of my bands left for tour as well. All of the songs have manifested themselves. They've sort of been birthed from my ideas onto various recording devices over the years. And it's a great place where I can experiment with recording techniques as well. But yeah, pretty much everything I've released under my own name has come out from this basement.
And would you like to maybe plug or just say what the names of your EPs or just songs have been? Some notable ones?
I think some notable ones come to mind. Well, there's the first EP that I ever released that to me seems kind of goofy now, but I mean, I guess it was always sort of goofy. It was called Finger Foods. That's notable because that's the first thing I really ever recorded and released strictly under my own name, and it's my first time like writing songs on my bass guitar.
This is a snippet of Finger Foods.
I'm just waking up to start my day. The eggs are sizzling on the grill, and the OJ's filling my glass. I'm just gonna go tiptoe and sit on my comfy couch and watch the tube, all as the waves roll by. You know I like my pizza on the beach, my macaroni in the sand.
The last thing that I released under my own name, which was an EP called Art Park, was something that I feel is notable because it's the first time I spent a lot of time trying to make it sound exactly how I wanted it to.
This is 11/3/17, a spoken word piece off of Art Park.
A parched window is ripped open to the noise. The crickets have ceased to a change in key. A teeming silence rings, littered with obstruction. Consumed the organism, the swelling and dampening, a clack of the tracks, faintly splits through, reminder of a chunk close by. Back to silence, broken with a rubber screech.
So what musicians inspire you?
One big influence overall has been the band Fugazi. That band it has influenced so many other people. They are very intense about doing things how they want them to be done and doing them on their own terms, as well as, I think, having songs that are very, especially for a rock band, rhythmically intense and are filled with buildups of tension and release. I really like. And their notable part of their song, I don't know if songwriting, but their songs are sort of a sliding guitar and a repetitive bass line, which I like a lot. That's one band that's really influenced me. I also think something that I sort of go back and revisit continuously and have in the past year, maybe just in my mind, is Public Enemy, especially earlier Public Enemy with the Bomb Squad, because they, especially in the hip-hop world, made a lot of advances, or they're at the forefront of layering in really intense, bombastic rhythms.
All right, so can you explain what this Concord music scene is like? Because I feel like Concord, people always just think about Thoreau or Louisa May Alcott, but what's this underground scene?
When I was in high school here, I guess a fairly small group of high schoolers, and we were all friends. It was revolving around people would hang out at the radio station at the high school. Yes, our high school has a radio station. It's insane. It's amazing, as well as a recording studio that our high school has, which is also insane. Like those places where people who were quote unquote in the scene would hang out. So that's one aspect of it. And I think having those two types of places existing really allowed, and I think still does, for people to just create things, because you have, people like myself just like have so many resources. You can just, spend your time making things. So I think, that's sort of what the scene is like. It's just like, and then people hanging out throughout the day at school, and whatnot, forming projects here and there. You might come to school on Monday and someone says, oh yeah, like we started a band, like, oh, we've been trying this out. Oh, we have this idea. We might try this. Oh, can we play your next basement show? Oh, I'm thinking about putting on a show of my own. And then there were a few friends that I had, especially early on in high school. There's one kid who was in a band called Tundra, and they would play like DIY shows. I was like, okay, I want to go, and I liked the band. So after going to a show for like the first time in Concord, I went to a show in Chelmsford at, I think, a community center there. Then there was also this garage called the Lion's Den in Clinton, Mass, that had shows where I'd also go. So that was sort of like the early on, quote unquote, like DIY shows. And then also, I guess one of the first shows I went to in Boston was at the Cambridge Elks Lodge, which has had so many shows over the years and still, I hope, will continue after the pandemic. But it was with Claire Cottrell, a.k.a., as you listeners might know her, Clairo, when she was making more indie rock music. Since we went, like myself and a few other friends who I was in a band with at the time, we went. She played with a few other indie bands, Frankie Cosmos and Porches, and a local band, Harmoose. So that was sort of the beginnings of going to shows in the city. But around that time, my band at the time, which was just my own name, since I had made all the music, we got booked to play at the Democracy Center, and that really kicked things off for me. It was just a big deal to play in the city. So for me, it was just like, okay, it's a big deal. Like, all right, you played in your suburban town, which is awesome. Now you're able to play in the city. It felt like, okay, like the big leagues, like this is a big deal, which it is. It's cool just to be able to play really any show, to have somebody want to book your band. But the Democracy Center, it's a community space, focused on more political things in Harvard Square. A variety of groups use it. And there's been shows happening there for, I think, over 15 years. And at the time, well, no, there's always been a variety, but there's been a lot of punk shows that have happened there. So playing at that place was a big deal. And after playing there and, just going to more shows and all, and making myself, I guess, more known in the scene, the people who are still involved with the Democracy Center, we're looking to actually make a collective for facilitating shows. And my friend said, oh, well, maybe Nick wants to be part of it. And I said, yes, I do. So then I joined and essentially started facilitating the shows, which pretty much means, working with bookers to make sure they can have access to the space. If and when it's available for the show, then going and working with other collective members to set up the PA system and collect donations at the door, then clean up and do overall, like, quote-unquote crowd control to make sure it all goes well. And it's an extremely special space.
So I know you are in many bands, or have been in so many bands. So Edge Pedal Burn is probably your most notable. So can you explain the genre of music that you play, the role you are in the band, and what else you've done with them?
Like, I'd pretty much met everybody in the band from being in the scene, and which is cool. It wasn't, say, some outside band or people that I didn't really know. And I played a couple songs with them. And they seemed to like me, and they said, "You're in the band!" And it was cool, because then as soon as you join a band, it's like you have a whole group of people then that you're essentially friends with, and then you're going to spend a ton of time with writing songs, recording, and touring. And that's the first time I ever toured with a band. The first tour really was about, what was it, a week or 2 weeks, something like that, I want to say, right after I graduated high school. And it was up and down the East Coast, and that was a pretty big deal. You book the tour yourself. That's what we did. And it was I booked a decent amount of the shows. The lead singer Olivia, she booked a decent amount. Yeah, I mean that's Edge Petal Burn essentially.
This is a snippet of 5 Golden Rings by Edge Petal Burn.
5 golden rings unto me, no good if I can't use them and hold them in my arms. Meaningless chatter won't clean my dirty soul and save me from this place. In your eyes, I see nothing, no pride or joy or sense of pain. In your lies, you're misguided, but I'm happy knowing I'm the bigger girl.
I know we're in a pandemic right now, but are you guys working on anything new at the moment?
Well, currently, like right now, no, we don't have anything in the works. But I found out the other day that Olivia, one of her friends, who she is house sitting for, was contacted by his friend at a music publishing company and was asking if he knew of any good bands, and he recommended us. So we're in talks to possibly have our music in a movie if they select it, but then also they might be interested in having us on their label. So we are, I wouldn't say slowly but surely, but soon trying to make something happen, which is pretty interesting opportunity. And it's not something I really expected, but it's cool. But right now, do we have anything that we're working on? No, but I think what I just discussed will put us into a higher gear to make something happen.
So do you have any advice for people who want to start creating music?
Yes, I do have advice. Don't just put out something if it's not up to your own standards. You might not even know what those standards are, but make it something that you're really proud of, and don't just release it too soon, whatever that is. Make it something that you're proud of. That might take a while, but craft it and think, okay, this is ready to be released. And then maybe a month later, maybe a week later, you might decide, oh, that's not too good. But then that might be fuel to keep working on something else. And over time, ideally, you keep developing. That's my advice. So just craft your thing. Don't put out something that's half-assed.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Beat You To It. I'm your host, Conley. The music you heard in this podcast was by Nick Owen, who you can find on Bandcamp, as well as music by Edge Petal Burn, who are on Apple Music and Spotify. The outro song is Self-Defined by Nick Owen.